My name is Audrey Pierce, I'm 34, and on my wedding day, the only thing I could focus on were the empty chairs. The garden venue was perfect, a scene stolen from a fairy tale. Hundreds of tiny string lights twinkled like captured stars in the twilight, casting a warm, golden glow over the faces of our friends. The air smelled of roses and fresh-cut grass. Beside me, Evan Carter, my Evan, squeezed my hand. His warmth was a steady anchor in the swirling sea of my emotions. "You're trembling," he whispered, his voice a low, comforting rumble meant only for me. He turned, his blue eyes searching mine, full of a love so pure and unconditional it almost hurt to look at. "You okay?" I forced a smile, the muscles in my cheeks feeling stiff and unnatural. "Just nerves," I lied. But it wasn't nerves. It was a familiar, hollow ache that had just carved out a fresh space in my chest. As the officiant began to speak, my gaze drifted past him, past the smiling faces of Evan's parents and his sister, past my college friends and former colleagues, to the front row on my side. 2 chairs, meticulously decorated with white satin ribbons and a single gardenia each, sat vacant. My mother, Helen, and my father, Walter, were supposed to be sitting there. Next to them, another empty seat for my brother, Gregory. They weren't just late. They weren't coming. There had been no call, no text, not even a hastily written email. There was just silence. A silence that was louder and more damning than any argument we could have ever had. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a seat at their table, and on the one day that mattered most, they didn't even bother to show up. A cold wave of humiliation washed over me. Everyone could see it. Every guest who turned their head, every friend who offered a pitying glance, knew. The Pierce family had deemed their daughter's wedding unimportant. Evan must have felt the shift in me. He tightened his grip, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. It was a small gesture, but it was everything. It was his way of saying, "I'm here. I see you. You are not alone." I drew a shaky breath and turned my focus back to him, to the man who saw all the parts of me my family chose to ignore. I repeated my vows, my voice clearer and stronger than I expected. I promised to love and cherish him, and in that moment, I also made a silent vow to myself. I would stop waiting for the people who were supposed to love me to finally start. My new family began here, with Evan. The empty chairs were not a sign of my failure, but a symbol of my liberation. Several years passed. Evan and I built a life together, a life filled with laughter, mutual respect, and the quiet comfort of being truly seen. My little startup, Spark Vibe Studio, which I'd built from nothing in my tiny apartment, had exploded. We created short-form video content that went viral, that started trends, that made brands household names. It was a whirlwind of sleepless nights, caffeine-fueled strategy sessions, and the exhilarating thrill of creation. And then, the offer came, a buyout from a major streaming platform that I couldn't refuse. The number had so many zeros it looked fake. After the deal closed, after the student loans were vaporized and our future secured, I did something just for me. I walked into a dealership and bought the car I'd had a poster of on my wall since I was 16. A Porsche 911, classic and sleek, in a stunning shade of gentian blue. It wasn't about the price tag, it was a trophy. It was a physical manifestation of every time someone told me I couldn't, of every late night I'd pushed through the doubt. I took a picture of it sitting in our driveway, the setting sun glinting off its perfect curves, and posted it to Facebook. The caption was simple: "Hard work pays off. Feeling grateful." The likes and congratulatory comments poured in from friends and old colleagues. But I wasn't looking for their validation. In some small, foolish part of my heart, I think I was still looking for my family's. For days, there was nothing. Just the same old silence. I told myself I didn't care. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" Audrey. The voice was clipped, cold, and instantly recognizable. My mother, Helen. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. She hadn't called me in years, not since the perfunctory, 5-minute call after I'd left a voicemail about my engagement. Mom? I said, my voice barely a whisper. I saw the car, she stated, no preamble, no, how are you? You owe us an explanation. I was stunned into silence. An explanation? For what? For being successful. For buying something with my own money. The audacity was breathtaking. We're having a family meeting, she continued, her tone leaving no room for discussion. Tomorrow. 8 o'clock. At the house. And then she hung up. I stood in my kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead air. A bitter, metallic taste filled my mouth. Not a word about my wedding. Not a single question about my life. But a 6-figure car on social media. That warranted a summons. A demand. It wasn't a reunion. It was an interrogation. Evan found me a few minutes later, my knuckles white from gripping the kitchen counter. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. What's wrong? I took a shaky breath. That was my mother, I said. They want to have a family meeting. The absurdity of it all bubbled up inside me, and a dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. They finally want to see me. The drive to my parents' house felt like a journey back in time, and with every mile, the confident woman I'd become began to shrink, replaced by the invisible girl I used to be. Growing up in our tidy suburban home in Madison, Wisconsin, there were 2 children, but only one star, my older brother, Gregory. Greg was the golden child, the prince, and I was his shadow. I remember one specific spring when I was 15. Greg, a junior in high school, had won the state debate championship. It was all he, or my parents, could talk about for weeks. The day he came home with the towering gold trophy, my father, Walter, clapped him on the back so hard Greg stumbled. That's my boy, he boomed, his voice thick with pride. Future senator, right here. That weekend, our backyard was transformed into a party zone. A massive banner proclaiming, "Congratulations Greg, our champion," was strung between 2 trees. My mother, Helen, rushed around with trays of food, her face flushed with excitement. Relatives I hadn't seen in years showed up to shake Greg's hand and slip him $20 bills. My father stood by the grill, flipping burgers and telling anyone who would listen about Greg's brilliant closing arguments. Greg, for his part, soaked it all in, accepting the praise as if it were his birthright. In the midst of the chaos, I tried to show my mom the award I'd won that same week. It was a certificate, neatly framed, for first place in the city's annual youth photography competition. My winning photo was a quiet, black and white shot of an old man sitting on a park bench, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and stories. I was proud of it. I thought it captured something real. "Mom, look," I said, holding it up. She glanced at it for a fraction of a second, her eyes already scanning the yard for an empty glass. "Oh, that's nice, honey," she murmured, her voice distracted. "Can you go see if your aunt needs a refill?" She turned away before I could even respond. The framed certificate felt heavy and stupid in my hands. I quietly took it back to my room and set it on my desk, behind a stack of textbooks. It never made it to the living room wall, the one crowded with Greg's debate trophies, his soccer medals, his academic excellence plaques. My achievements were nice. His were worthy of celebration. It wasn't just the big things. It was the constant, daily erosion of my self-worth. At dinner, my father would ask Greg to break down the political news of the day. He'd ask me if I'd finished my homework. My mother would spend hours helping Greg drill for his SATs. She'd tell me to keep the noise down while I was editing my first tentative video projects in my room. They weren't just favoring him, they were cultivating him for a life of success they'd preordained, while I was just there. An afterthought. A quiet, unassuming fixture in the background of the Gregory Pierce show. I learned early on that their love and attention were finite resources, and all of it had been allocated to him. My sanctuary was a stuffy, poorly lit room in the basement of my high school, the multimedia arts classroom. I'd signed up for the elective on a whim, desperate for an escape from the competitive pressure of my other classes. The teacher, Ms. Albright, was a woman with kind eyes and a passion that was utterly infectious. She didn't teach us about art, she taught us about seeing. While my family saw my quietness as a defect, Ms. Albright saw it as a strength. "You're an observer, Audrey," she told me one afternoon, looking over my shoulder at a short video I'd made of raindrops racing down a windowpane. "You see the poetry in the mundane. That's a gift." For the first time, I felt like someone had looked past the shadow and seen me. She encouraged me to enter the local student film festival. The theme was hometown. I poured my soul into it. For weeks, I carried the school's clunky camcorder everywhere. I didn't film the big, obvious landmarks. I filmed the little things that were so easily overlooked: a stray cat stretching in a patch of sunlight, the worn-out hands of a woman selling flowers at the farmer's market, a child's laughter echoing in an empty playground at dusk. I edited for hours, teaching myself the basics on free software, layering a simple, melancholic piano track over the images. I called it Forgotten Corners. I tried to tell my parents about the festival. "It's a pretty big deal," I said at dinner, my voice shaking slightly. "They're showing the films at the Majestic Theater downtown." My dad grunted from behind his newspaper. "Don't you have a calculus exam coming up?" My mom just smiled, that tight, polite smile of hers. "That sounds fun, dear. But that's the same night as Greg's pre-law society banquet. We've had it on the calendar for months." Of course. A banquet for a college club was mandatory. A film festival showcasing their daughter's work was fun. I didn't argue. I just nodded and finished my dinner in silence. The night of the festival, I sat alone in the plush velvet seat of the old theater, my stomach in knots. When my film started, I held my breath. The theater was silent as my quiet, forgotten moments filled the giant screen. When it ended, there was a beat of silence, and then, applause. Real, genuine applause. My heart hammered against my ribs. They saw it. Strangers saw what I was trying to say. And then they announced the winner for Best Direction. It was me. I stumbled onto the stage, my hands shaking as I accepted the small, heavy statuette. I scanned the audience one last time, a pathetic little flicker of hope dying in my chest as I confirmed, once again, that the seats where my family should have been were empty. That night, I walked home under the streetlights, clutching my award. The validation felt amazing, but the loneliness was a bitter chaser. In my room, I didn't put the award on my dresser to gather dust. I put it on the desk right next to my computer, and with the prize money, I bought my first real editing software. If my family wasn't going to be my audience, I decided, then I would find a new one. I opened my laptop, went to YouTube, and created a channel. I called it Audrey's Lens. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the story so far, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this crazy journey. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. Seeing how far these stories travel is one of my favorite things. Thanks so much for your support. College was my escape hatch. I stayed in Madison, but attending the university felt like entering a different universe. I got a partial scholarship for their communications program and covered the rest with a mountain of student loans and a part-time job as a barista that started at 5 a.m. My parents paid for Greg's entire law school tuition without blinking. For me, they offered a clipped, good luck. It was all the motivation I needed. My life became a relentless cycle. Brew lattes from dawn till noon, attend lectures in the afternoon, study in the library till it closed, and then, fueled by leftover coffee, edit videos for my channel until my eyes burned. Audrey's lens was slowly growing. I wasn't a superstar, but I had a small, dedicated community. They were the ones who saw me. My breakthrough came from a digital media class taught by Professor Davies. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man who didn't coddle his students. He saw potential in my work and nominated me to lead our university's team in a national competition, creating a digital campaign for a mental health nonprofit. It was an immense amount of pressure. For months, my team and I practically lived in the media lab. We interviewed students, animated graphics, and storyboarded until our brains felt like mush. I personally oversaw every single frame of the final video. We won. First place. The prize included a $10,000 grant and a feature on the nonprofit's national platform. I was ecstatic. Standing on that stage at the awards ceremony in Chicago, holding a heavy glass trophy, felt like a dream. My first call was to my parents. I thought, this is it. This is the achievement they can't ignore. Mom, we won. I said, my voice buzzing with excitement. There was a pause. Oh, that's great, honey. Really, she said, but her tone was flat. Listen, I can't talk long, your brother is in the middle of closing his first big case as an intern. It's all very exciting. Click. The line went dead. I stood there in my nice dress, trophy in hand, surrounded by celebrating people, and felt utterly, completely foolish. I had won a national award. Greg had done his job as an intern. In their eyes, there was no comparison. The validation I was chasing from them was a mirage. It would never be real. That night, something inside me finally hardened. I stopped trying to make them proud and started focusing on making myself successful. The anger became fuel. After graduation, I poured every ounce of my energy and the grant money into my own company, Spark Vibe Studio. The beginning was brutal. I worked out of a cheap co-working space that always smelled like burnt popcorn. I lived on ramen and the sheer, stubborn refusal to fail. I pitched to dozens of potential clients, facing more rejections than I could count. One rainy Tuesday, I had a particularly soul-crushing meeting. A potential major client had basically laughed me out of their boardroom. Honey, this is cute, the CEO had said, patting my portfolio. But we need a real agency. I walked out into the downpour, feeling like a complete fraud. I ducked into the nearest coffee shop, not for coffee, but just to escape the rain and my own spiraling thoughts. I was sitting in a corner booth, staring blankly at my laptop, when a man's voice gently broke through my haze. Rough day. I looked up and saw him. Evan. He had kind eyes and a quiet smile. He was a mechanical engineer, he told me, and he'd just gotten out of a brutal project meeting himself. We started talking, and it was easy. Effortless. He listened, really listened, when I ranted about my failed pitch. He didn't offer platitudes, he asked smart questions. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just shouting into a void. Our relationship grew in tandem with my company. Evan was there the night I landed my first big client, and we celebrated with cheap pizza on the floor of my empty office. He was the one who held me when a key employee quit and I thought everything would fall apart. He saw the struggle, the grit, the passion, not just the polished end result. He loved the person I was, not the person he thought I should be. When Spark Vibe finally took off, thanks to a seed investment from a brilliant venture capitalist named Ramona Shaw who saw my vision, life changed at lightning speed. We hired a team. We moved into a slick downtown office. We were creating campaigns that people were talking about. And through it all, Evan was my constant. One evening, sitting on a park bench overlooking the lake where we'd had one of our first dates, he pulled out a ring. It was simple, elegant, and so perfectly me. "Audrey," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the most incredible person I've ever met. Marry me." Tears streamed down my face as I said yes. While planning the wedding, a small, stupid part of me held out hope. This was marriage. This was the big one. They had to show up for this. I sent the invitation to my parents' address, a beautiful, cream-colored card with elegant script. I even included a handwritten note. "I really hope you can be there. It would mean the world to me." The RSVP deadline came and went. Silence. That silence was my answer. It was the final confirmation of a truth I had known my whole life. To them, I would always be an afterthought. The wedding, as it turned out, was the most beautiful day of my life, but it was also the day I finally mourned the loss of a family I never truly had. Driving the Porsche to my parents' house felt surreal. The smooth purr of the engine was a stark contrast to the frantic beating of my heart. Every landmark on the way was a ghost. There was the park where I filmed my first winning video, the library where I spent countless nights studying, the corner store where I'd buy candy after a bad day. This town was my history, a museum of a childhood spent yearning for a scrap of attention. But as I pulled onto their familiar, tree-lined street, I realized something had shifted. The fear was gone. The desperate need for their approval had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, calm resolve. I wasn't the invisible little girl anymore, showing up with a framed certificate, hoping for a pat on the head. I was a 34-year-old woman who had built an empire from their neglect. I wasn't here to plead my case. I was here to close it. I parked the car at the curb, its gleaming blue frame looking alien in front of their modest brick house. I took one deep breath, got out, and walked up the familiar concrete path. I didn't knock. I used the old key they'd never asked me to return. The scene inside was exactly as I'd pictured. A tribunal. My father, Walter, sat in his usual armchair, a formidable throne of worn leather. My mother, Helen, perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. And on the opposite couch, my brother, Greg, sat with his wife, Sam. They all looked up as I entered, their expressions a mixture of resentment and expectation. No one stood up. No one said hello. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. I felt like a defendant walking into her own sentencing. I didn't sit down. I stood in the middle of the living room, feeling the worn carpet under my feet. It was the same carpet I'd sat on as a child, watching them praise Greg. My father was the first to speak, his voice laced with a condescending authority. "Nice car," he said, not as a compliment, but as an opening statement. "Looks like you're doing all right for yourself." Greg didn't bother with pleasantries. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his face a mask of entitlement. "Audrey, I'm going to be blunt," he began. "Sam and I are in a tough spot. The market is crap, and we need to get Paige and Owen into a better school district. We need your help. Your family. You have a duty to help." A dry, bitter laugh almost escaped my lips. Duty. Family. The words sounded obscene coming from his mouth. I met his gaze, my own voice dangerously calm. "A duty?" I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "That's a fascinating choice of words, Greg. Tell me, where was this sense of family duty on my wedding day?" My mother flinched. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Audrey," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "You know how busy things were." "Busy?" I shot back, my voice rising. "What could have possibly been more important than your only daughter's wedding?" It was Greg who answered, with a smugness that made my blood boil. "I had a golf tournament with my firm's senior partners," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. It was an important networking opportunity. I stared at him, then at my parents, who were nodding in agreement. And in that moment, all the years of pain and anger coalesced into a single point of white-hot clarity. A golf game. They had missed my wedding for a damn golf game. A golf game, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I looked at each of them, one by one. You missed me walking down the aisle, you missed me saying my vows, you missed the most important day of my life, for a golf game. It was a chance for him to make partner, my father boomed. You have to be strategic in life, Audrey. I have been strategic, Dad, I said, my voice suddenly as sharp as glass. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, placing it on the coffee table with a soft thud. You see this car, you see my success, and you think you're entitled to a piece of it. You think I owe you. I opened the folder. Inside was a single document. You're right about one thing. I have been doing very well. The company I built was acquired for a significant amount of money. 18 million, to be exact. A collective gasp went through the room. Greg's eyes widened with greed. But you seem to have misunderstood something fundamental, I continued, my voice cold and steady. You think that money is for you. For your mortgage, for your kids' private school. You're wrong. I pushed the document across the table toward them. It was a signed, notarized confirmation of a charitable donation. $15 million of that money, I announced, has been transferred to a foundation that provides scholarships and arts education for underprivileged children. Kids who have no one in their corner. Kids who get overlooked. I watched their faces as the reality of my words sank in. My mother's face went pale. My father's turned a blotchy, furious red. Greg snatched the paper, his hands shaking with rage as he read it. You did what? He snarled, his voice a strangled cry. That money could have set my kids up for life. How could you be so selfish? Selfish? I finally let out the laugh that had been building inside me. It was a raw, broken sound. I spent 20 years of my life begging for a shred of the attention you got for breathing. I built my entire life without a single one of you. You don't get to call me selfish. I turned and walked to the door, my heart pounding with a terrifying, exhilarating freedom. I had finally said it all. This, I said, turning back one last time, my hand on the doorknob, is what I learned about family. You don't get one by default. You build one. And the family I've built has no room for any of you. I walked out and closed the door on their stunned, silent faces, leaving my old life behind for good. Walking away from that house felt like shedding a skin I had been trapped in my entire life. I blocked their numbers before I even started the car. I deleted their emails, unfollowed them on every platform, and methodically removed every trace of their existence from my digital life. It was a clean, brutal amputation. It had to be. The fallout was predictable. I heard through a cousin, who called to tell me how appalled she was by my cruelty, that Greg's financial situation was worse than he'd let on. He'd been over-leveraged, counting on a bailout from his successful little sister. Without it, he lost their house. My niece and nephew, Paige and Owen, had to switch to public school. My parents, who had been banking on a comfortable retirement supplemented by their golden son, were now working part-time jobs, my father as a greeter at a hardware store, my mother in retail. A part of me felt a twinge of sadness for the kids, caught in the crossfire of their parents' arrogance. But I had spent years trying to be an aunt to them, sending birthday gifts that were never acknowledged, inviting them to events they never attended. Their parents had taught them to see me as irrelevant, and I couldn't save them from the consequences of that. My real life, my chosen life, was with Evan. He held me that night as I finally let myself cry, not for them, but for the little girl who had deserved so much better. You did the right thing, he whispered into my hair, and I knew he was right. His family became my family, in every sense of the word. His parents would call just to check in. His sister would send me stupid memes that made me laugh out loud. Their love was easy, unconditional, and freely given. It was everything I had been starved for. I didn't start another company. The fire that had driven me to prove my worth had been replaced by a gentler, warmer flame, purpose. I threw myself into the work of the foundation I'd endowed. I started a mentorship program, teaching kids from tough backgrounds how to tell their own stories through video. One of my first ments was a whip-smart 14-year-old girl named Mia. She was quiet, just like I had been, but behind her shy eyes was a universe of ideas. I taught her how to edit, how to frame a shot, how to find the narrative in the noise. One afternoon, as she proudly showed me her first completed short film, she threw her arms around me in a sudden, fierce hug. "Thank you, Audrey," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. No one ever thought I could do something like this. Tears welled in my eyes. I hugged her back tightly, and in that moment, the last of the old wounds finally began to heal. My worth was never about getting their approval. It was about this. It was about taking the pain of being invisible and using it to make sure another kid felt seen. My family had created a shadow, but I had learned to find the light, not just for myself, but for others who were still stuck in the dark. Sometimes I still find myself thinking about it, late at night. I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have found a way to help my niece and nephew without letting my parents and brother back into my life. Was I the asshole for going completely no contact and cutting them all off? Thank you for listening to my story. It means so much to be able to share it with all of you. If this resonated with you in any way, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. Your support is what makes this community so special. Thank you for being here.